Hi, my name is Annie Swingen, Director for External Relations at the American Foreign Policy Council in Washington, D.C. On this episode of AFPC Insights, our fellow in Indo-Pacific Studies, Michael Sobolik, is going to discuss China's coronavirus disinformation campaign and what it means for U.S. foreign policy. Hey, Michael.
Hi, Annie. So, understanding how the Chinese Communist Party has been waging a disinformation campaign in regards to coronavirus is something that's going to be really important for American policymakers, especially to understand. For decades, the whole concept of Chinese censorship and how the Communist Party controls information inside of China was thought to be primarily a human rights issue. And one of the biggest differences in these strange times that we're living in with the coronavirus pandemic is that China's information control is very obviously and very quickly becoming to be seen as a national security threat, and also, frankly, a transnational issue that impacts the domestic policies of every country in the world, not just the People's Republic of China. So understanding what the Communist Party's been doing is going to be really important. And unpacking that is interesting because as time has gone on, there have been four distinct phases of what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing in its information control, starting from January to where we are today in May. The first phase, which began in late December and went into January, is probably best understood as a damage control phase, where senior leadership, the Communist Party in Beijing and officials at the local level in Wuhan became aware of the virus's existence. And their first instinct was not to share information, but to stop the spread of that critical information. And you saw that in a few ways. In Wuhan, the Communist Party came down hard on physicians and doctors who were working on research for the virus and told them, not only can you not share your research with your colleagues, but you need to destroy viral test samples that you have. And doctors were intimidated. And specifically, there's one that Li Wenliang, one of the physicians who was among the first to discover the coronavirus COVID-19, and he actually succumbed to it and later passed away. He was one of the physicians that was directly targeted by the Communist Party. So as the months went on, probably mainly into February and especially in March, the Communist Party's focus was primarily still internal, but they began to move away from those coercive mechanisms of information control, away from intimidation, and into a different direction of stoking nationalism domestically among their own population to try to deflect blame away from themselves. And that's the best way to understand the second phase of what the party began to do in those months. We saw this especially when China's foreign ministry and some communications officials, specifically on Twitter, began to propagate conspiracy theories that the coronavirus originated from the United States and that U.S. Army personnel brought the virus to Wuhan. And the reason this was so important for the party to do is because the party, as the only viable political entity inside of China, has a legitimacy problem that has been ongoing since 1949, when Mao Zedong led and executed the first steps of the Communist Revolution. So the party will often turn to nationalism to redirect the focus of their own population away from the party's mistakes and towards anger of outside entities, whether that's Japan or the United States, and in this case, the United States. And you see the party working with the population as opposed to against it to try to deflect the focus. The third phase, the party's focus shifted away from internal issues and towards external issues, because by this point, March and early April, this is no longer just an issue with China. This is an issue that's global and certainly regional. The party began to increase its focus in its own neighborhood in February, when the foreign minister pressed a lot of countries inside of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to not impose travel bans on China. But in March and especially April, the party began to execute a charm offensive. And instead of approaching the world through strong arming them, which will come later, and it's the phase we're in currently, but The third phase was really marked by China exporting a lot of personal protective equipment and trying to share a lot of health aid that they could provide to allies, partners around the whole world. And the goal for the party was to be seen as a net health care provider and not the source of the problem that the world was in with the pandemic. One of the interesting details about this is from January through March, the Communist Party pushed a lot of their own companies to buy up PPE around the world, and then beginning in March and into April, sold that equipment at a profit. And not only equipment that they bought, but also defective equipment that they themselves produced and tried to sell at a profit, which then began to produce problems for them because they wanted to be seen in a positive light, but a lot of the masks and ventilators they were shipping turned out to be defective. So the fourth phase, which in many ways was a product not just of that specific backlash, but a larger backlash against China's role in the pandemic, the phase that we're in now specifically is economic coercion, where the Communist Party is beginning to realize that this is a problem for them, not just diplomatically, but strategically. The party is suffering from a deficit of trust because they were not trustworthy themselves with how they failed to share information when it mattered most. So we've seen, even just in the past few weeks, China pressure governments, particularly in Europe, whether Sweden, Germany, Brussels itself, the European Union, into the Indo-Pacific with Australia, to try to shape the investigations that governments are doing with the origins of the virus, and China leveraging its market to say to a lot of foreign governments, if you push too hard, we might reevaluate specific exports that we accept from your country. So China has been executing a full court press internally and externally. And the important thing to realize, among others, is that the sequence of these four phases hasn't been discrete, where when China stopped its charm offensive, it suddenly began to coerce the world. Like, all of these phases have been building on each other. China is still today is controlling information in its borders. It is still stoking nationalism. And even as it continues to try to build a positive image, it is absolutely beginning to execute the new phase of coercive diplomacy.
Thank you so much for your time. And I hope that you guys stay safe and healthy.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Andy. I hope the same for you too.